You're on the Six Screens Telenetwork, earning the reputation of giving all the right ingredients, uninhibited, in exposing the hard, cold facts about the Watchtower Society.
Well, so good to see so many people coming in tonight to the Six Screens. Friends, this is where former Jehovah's Witnesses come to talk, and they've been doing it now for 20 years right here on the Six Screens Telenetwork. My name is Rick Ferrin, and I'm coming to you from Boston, and we are looking at a man that'll be coming on here very shortly. His name is Jay Hess. Now, normally, Barbara Anderson would be coming on. I talked to Barbara this week. She's not feeling well. She has a very hoarse throat, so she's having a hard time talking even. So she's not coming on, but I figured what better replacement for tonight for filling in for Barbara. We have another Watchtower insider to some degree. Well, in fact, he is Jay Hess, a good friend of mine, and I'll tell you what, he's a very knowledgeable man. Normally, Jay comes on Sunday programming here at the Six Screens. He deals with theological issues and what have you, but that's not going to be his subjects tonight, even though we might get a little into some of it. Of course, you have to. The Watchtower is a religious organization. But what Jay is focused on tonight, and what really impressed me when I met Jay Hess for the first time in 2004, is Jay Hess. I met him at the Witnesses Now for Jesus convention down in Pennsylvania. And what really got me excited when I met Jay is he was involved at one point with the Watchtower writing department. And that rocked my boat, so to speak. I really thought that was fantastic. I was just getting out of the Watchtower into, I always held the writing department at the highest level. But gee, when I heard he was involved with them and now he's an ex-witness, I'm saying, what's going on here? So he's going to tell you why he was disfellowshipped. He's going to tell you about some of the goofiest things that goes on in the Watchtower. So let's bring Jay on right now. Say hello to Jay. Boy, we all love Jay. Hello, Jay.
Hey, Rick.
So there you are. I'm going to turn the volume up a little bit here. But, boy, it's so good to see you. You're coming in from North Carolina. Boy, I'll tell you what, you guys are becoming the apostate capital of the world down there. I say we're up here in Boston, but boy, you got Jimmy Bell coming on tonight, and then you've got others. Jody's coming. Well, he's on the program as well. A lot of people from that Carolina area. So thank you for coming on and wanting to fill in for Barbara, Jay. I know you have an awful lot to talk about. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut you loose. I'm here, though, if you need me. And what I want you to do is just kind of give the audience, you're on for a couple hours tonight, so give the audience a little understanding of who Jay is and what you do and all of this, and get into what you know about the Watchtower. We'd love to hear it. So you're all by yourself, Jay. I'm here if you need me.
All right. Thank you very much, Rick. And thank you for doing this. You've been doing it for all this time, and it's been great. I love the news, and always something new with the Watchtower, isn't it? So I'm Jay Hess. Currently, I live in North Carolina. I was an active JW, about 30 years ago, 35 years ago, and I was had been in it. I've been raised in it up until I was 39 years old, and baptized and we'd say baptized and dedicated for about 23 years from the time of baptism until I was expelled. Yes, I was expelled. We call it disfellowshipped for telling people that I worship Jesus. And this is all a result of I was out at a store called Kmart in California, and I was coming out of the Kmart, and I saw this fellow Christian handing out these little handouts, and I go, I'm ready for him. I'm ready, and I'm going to take him on. And I told him I'm one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and he says, and then he sets aside his tract, and he says, I got a question for you. Can you explain this verse? And I couldn't explain it, Hebrews 1:6, and that started me in a research direction. I go, sounds like, and at that time the translation of the Watchtower had said, worshiping Jesus. I go, what's up with that? Had no answer. And that started me on a path. And then found out that, okay, this is what the Watchtower's position, their history, they've covered it up. And I had no idea that this is what they believed. And I told some witnesses, and other things happened, and I got the boot. So that's my history. And I'm going to talk more about this, about my history as a Jehovah's Witness. I say a JW, Jehovah's Witness, JW. And the nutty things, but it's not just the nutty things. It's the things that are really harmful, that their abuse of their power, their influence, their authority, and there's nothing you can do, because if they've convinced you and your family and they decide to expel you, there's nothing you can do to stop it and have it destroy families. So I'm going to talk about that. And these are the years of, well, I was baptized in late 1960s and then expelled by 1990. So maybe you know of some nutty things or some mean things the Watchtower has done. And why do we as Jehovah's Witnesses look into this stuff, the negative stuff or the nutty things? What's the point of that? Well, for me, as I was going through my life as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, we were readers. We were told to read. And I would remember what I'm reading in the Watchtower, and then I noticed some things that were nutty. And I go, there's something wrong here. And I was in the organization for about a year or two, and this book, oh, can't see it there. Oh, can't see it. Oh, I got oh dear. It's because the book is green. The nation shall know that I am Jehovah. How? And I've got the green screen on. And in it, they said, this stuff is nutty. And I go, there's something wrong. But I knew that you can't talk about these things. Can't talk about it to anybody. If you're married, can't talk to your spouse. They'll turn you in. Oh, and you think about it, or I was thinking about it, and I said, there's something wrong about this. And as time went on, I'm reading more the Watchtower literature and going to meetings and being real faithful, and there's something wrong here. And when I was expelled, then how do I cope with this? Losing family, losing all my friends. Why? How did this happen? Why did this happen? And one of the stages I had to go through to get my head straight was I had to research those areas where the Watchtower was doing not just nutty things, but they were and had confessed to doing things that were really wrong, really bad. And that was the step I needed. It couldn't be rumor and innuendo. Couldn't be hearsay. It had to be things that they had confessed to doing, that it clearly shows that they are not the faithful and discreet slave. What they were doing was not faithful, and it was not discreet or wise. I needed that to make the mental break, because this organization has these claims. Now, if they claim to just be a social group or even just a business, but they claim to be the channel of God. And at that time, they emphasized the faithful and discreet slave. That's pretty serious. That's not claiming to be a religion or a group that makes mistakes. They claimed that they had been chosen to be the faithful and discreet slave as of the year 1919. And they've been faithful and discreet, faithful and wise, ever since 1919. Then I found out those claims are false. They, for some of those years, they didn't even claim to be the faithful slave. They didn't even know they were the faithful slave. And then they did things that are really horrific, that were really bad, by any standard, and they don't apologize. They don't go back and fix up what they hurt, and that was what mattered. Yeah, they did a lot of nutty things, a lot of crazy things, but they make excuses. Oh, nobody's perfect. Of course, nobody's perfect. This is not that important. It's not serious. Yada yada yada. But it is serious. They destroyed families for nonsense, things that, the light gets brighter and brighter. Well, it shouldn't be so bad that they destroy families and that they're still the faithful and discreet slave that God has chosen. Jesus has chosen back in 1919 to be rulers over in the kingdom. I needed to see that to make that mental step away from the organization. Then I went through a stage of thinking about the nutty things, the ridiculous things that they did. So we're going to talk about some of that tonight. And maybe you're thinking of such things yourself. And so when you, this is a show that you can call in and mention some of those. But I want to talk about first. One of the things that I thought was that was egregious that they admitted to doing. I don't remember the exact date. It's easy enough for me to find. And when this gets uploaded, could even put the actual Watchtower article and location of it in the uploaded notes. But back in the 1980s, because the Watchtower is an international organization, they have to be united. They have to have all the same rules everywhere. And they had to have rules for what do you do when there's a couple, husband and wife, say in Africa or some third world country, and they're not married, but the community accepts that they're married, but they weren't legally married. Now, for a long time, for years and years, they'd had the practice, the policy that if they were living together, they had children, the community looked at them as being married, no problem. If the partner, maybe it's the wife becomes a witness and the man does not. If the wife becomes a witness and the man does not, and he doesn't see the need to get legally married, and they don't marry, that's not going to be a problem. So they let it go. And if they were both witnesses and didn't want to get legally married, well, that was okay. Then they got this belief, a change of policy that, and of course, once they change that policy and they make it rule in one part of the world, it becomes a rule in the rest of the world, wherever the Watchtower was expanded to in these different parts of the world. Then they came out with the rule that if they had to get married, they had to get legally married. And if the husband doesn't want to get married, let's say he's a non-believer, he's not a witness, and he doesn't want to get married, she has to move out of the house. It's not enough that they had kids, and not enough that they both viewed it as a marriage, that the community saw it as a marriage. She had to move out. And in the Watchtower, first was the announcement that this was the change in rules. And then a couple months later, they would tell an example of this witness lady, a sister, just is so loyal to Jehovah that she walks out, she leaves, and she maintains her integrity to Jehovah and his organization, and she moves out. And then a little over a year after the original policy, Watchtower comes out and changes it back to pretty much the original view. That if the only difference is that if they're both witnesses, they both would have to get married, legally married, do whatever they had to get married. But if her husband was not a witness and he didn't want to get married, he didn't see the reason for a legal marriage, now you can stay with the guy. She wouldn't have to leave, and she wouldn't have to leave her children, and that would be okay. So you could imagine a lady who's a witness, loyal witness, And the Watchtower comes out, and she has got to get out and move out of her house, maybe with no support. Maybe she could take some of her children with her, maybe not. We don't know the circumstance, but she's out. If she's got baptized children, she can't even talk to them because she would be disfellowshipped had she stayed in the home. But she moves out, and then maybe the husband, he gets a girlfriend in the meantime, and then she goes out to her mailbox, opens up the Watchtower, and it says, "You didn't have to leave in the first place." How's that feel? You've had your marriage, your family torn apart. What was worse is what if she had stayed in the home and she had gotten disfellowshipped for staying in the home? Her baptized children can't talk to her. And then a little over a year later, comes out and says, "Oh, we made a mistake. It wasn't really wrong." Okay, are they going to reinstate her? How does this happen? But in the typical case where the lady witness, the sister, leaves the home, she's out and she has to move on, and maybe no support, and then find out that this was all unnecessary. This was not a secret. It was published in the Watchtower. There's no secret here. And would the channel that God is using, that God says, "You're faithful and discreet, and you have to listen to what the Watchtower says," would God use an organization that way? Or is God not in charge of his organization? He can't prevent them from tearing families apart. So that's just one of the examples. This is not meant to be funny or entertaining, but this is what I had to think about. This is bad. This is really bad. So I'm wanted to lead in with that story that you can check this up, check on this, that they published this. This is not a secret. It's not secondhand rumor. This is what their literature tells of how they flip-flop. This is the strobe light. The light comes on, the light goes off, the light comes back on, and they go back to pretty much the original view. And lives in the meantime are destroyed. There's other things to do with medical procedures, such that they allowed, then they didn't allow, and they go back to allowing, things like that. Sometimes people die because of the flip-flop of the Watchtower. So those of you who are ex-witnesses know the authority of the Watchtower. When they started the disfellowshipping policy, they didn't always have a disfellowshipping policy, but when they had their disfellowshipping policy, I think it's starting in the 50s, late 50s, that then they would announce what you were disfellowshipped for, and eventually they changed that. But they can control the family, because if any family members talk to the disfellowship person, they too can be disfellowshipped, and then they lose their family and friends, and it's a very nasty thing. So with that, I wanted to pause there to see let you think about that. What is the most egregious thing that can be proved using Watchtower literature that they did? And maybe you know of some, such as the organ transplant issue and things like that. So I'm going to go over some of my own history. As I came into the Watchtower, my folks got me involved in that in the late 50s. I didn't know any other real religion. My mother was a Methodist, kind of, sort of, and my father was an atheist. And so I didn't have any religious background. I got old enough where I was going door to door, knocking on doors, and I said, "Wow, these Jehovah's Witnesses, they seem to have all the answers. We're going door to door and knocking on doors. We might once in a while get someone who's a pastor, minister of a church, and they never gave a solid answer to the questions that we were asking. And over time, by the time I was in my mid-teens, I thought, wow, if if there was a truth, then Jehovah's Witnesses seem to have it, and they're telling that the end was so close. By 1968, they had published that the end is near. We think 1975 is going to probably be it, and then we're going to be the end of the world. And I better do something. I better do something quick. And at that time, the Watchtower said, if you're going to college, you shouldn't be going to college. Don't get involved in the college. So I was, should I do that? So I got in. I was interested in college. I was doing well in school. So I thought, well, I'm going to try college. I know the Watchtower says no, but not sure what the future is going to hold. And my parents said, you really ought to go to college. So I did. And I was punished. All of a sudden, I couldn't carry the microphones. I don't know if they, how they do that still, but during the meetings, during the Watchtower study, the good brothers get to carry the microphone and hand it around to the congregation. And I couldn't do that. I lost my privileges. That hurt. And this, why are they doing this? So I was going along, and at that time, this was the late 60s, early 1970s, and I was excited. The end is coming, and then this book came out. This green book, which you can't quite see, The Nation Shall Know That I Am Jehovah How. And I thought, this is a nutty book, because this whole book is about the centrality of the Watchtower Society. That this prophecy in Ezekiel is all about them. And I'm looking through it, studying it, sitting because we had book studies at that time in private homes. And there was some stuff in here that was really nutty. And that made me think. One of the things, there's a prophecy in Ezekiel. That wasn't really a prophecy. It was just saying that in Israel, in Jerusalem, in the temple there was animal worshiping images of animals. And everything that was in Ezekiel, the Watchtower pulled out and was saying applied to Christendom today, mainstream Christianity, Christendom today. And what do you think? What do you think that worship of animals represented in Christendom today? Well, the Watchtower says that the fulfillment of this prophecy in Ezekiel is that in the U.S., mainstream Christians are naming their sports teams after animals. Yes, that's fulfillment of Ezekiel. And I thought that's ridiculous, that would be a fulfillment of prophecy that we should look for, that they would name their sports heroes or sports teams after animals like dolphins and bears. Oh my. And it just started hitting me. This is silly. And I started having doubts. Then about this time, I got married, and I kept my doubts somewhat to myself, shared them with my wife. And thank you for pointing out the disfellowshipping started in 1952. Yeah, I thought that was about it. I started having doubts, sharing them with my wife, not too many others. And I understand people make mistakes. God allows mistakes within his leadership. But I kept thinking on the idea that they claim to be the faithful and discreet slave. And they can only be so nutty before that's no longer true. So I was baptized in 1968. And then time goes on, and we're getting closer to 1975. We're thinking that's the end. And no, Barbara's not here tonight. She's not well. So I'm setting in for Barbara, in case you wondered. And the Watchtower comes out that going to college is very dangerous because I think the exact phrase was constant onslaught of ungodly ideas is happening in college, and people go to college and they won't get out. So that was, that's frightening. And then we had a meeting that they called the service meeting. We ex-witnesses called it the Serve Us meeting. And there they had an article that we're just studying shortly before 1975 that it's been reported that loyal witnesses were selling their homes and taking that money and living in trailers so that they could go and pioneer, that means the full-time ministry, in places where it was necessary, and living out the months or weeks for the end to come. Oh, and that was encouraging people. And I knew a couple that did. Moved out home, moved in a trailer. Well, the end didn't come in 1975 or 76 or 77. And these families were harmed. Well, this is a false prophecy. And I would make excuses. Why aren't they a false prophet? But this book I mentioned a moment ago, The Nation Shall Know That I Am Jehovah, in there says that the end should come before the year 2000. See, this is a 1971 publication. That, you wondered. And then after 75, a couple years later, they came out, we might be off by a year or two, but not much more. And that was in the Watchtower. See, that's not rumor or innuendo. That was in the Watchtower that they would not be that far off. And you notice that the number of baptisms drops off and they're losing people. And it's getting in the early 1980s. And what are we going to do? So I wanted to put this on record because so many from that 1975, that was 45, 50 years ago. Wow. Who alive today remembers that? I remember being at a circuit assembly and what is this, 1974 and 1973, thereabouts. And the assembly part, whoever is the speaker, probably circuit overseer, gets up and says, he says, when you set yourself an alarm clock, you set yourself an alarm clock and the alarm is about to go off. Just before the alarm, there's a click in that alarm clock. He says, brothers and sisters, you have just heard that click. And the whole audience goes, whoa. We're so close, this is God's organization, and they know it's so close. We had a part at our local congregation where we would pretend that we were in the new system, and they had a part talking about that, we're so close. We're so close to the 1975 that we need to be prepared to be secret about where we are meeting so that they don't find us. Because we all know that the UN is going to take over the world. The UN. You watch. And they're going to come looking for us. So we're going to have to be careful. And I remember one brother, a friend of mine, about my same age, he had a part, and he says, he was wearing a sport coat, and you could turn it inside out and change your coat on the way to the meeting, and so they can't see you, can't recognize you, that you're a witness. Oh, the nuttiness that we would talk about because the end was so close. Well, that was 50 years ago, right? So I mention these things because I think it was therapeutic for me to go over the history of the Watchtower, the things they taught, not innuendo, not rumor, not hearsay, but things that were in their literature that was first damaging to people, hurt families, destroyed families, came up with and then look at the nutty things, the nutty rules, like we're going to watch out because the UN is going to take over, blah, blah, blah. Another one, they had a rule that it was okay for all the time I was in to play chess. Then after some years, it became wrong. Watchtower frowned on it. Well, they said it was wrong to play chess. So suddenly we all had to stop playing a game. You could play checkers, but you couldn't play chess. And then that went on for a few years, and then finally chess came back. Now, that wasn't an egregious thing, but it was dumb. And the number of dumb things was just increasing and increasing over time. Well, I went to college. I dropped out. And then 1975 didn't happen. The world didn't end. And I went back to college. Was still did not get privileges because I was back in college. Graduated, moved out of the area, hoping people would forget that I did this terrible thing of going to college. But it was by that time not considered so bad. And of course, then 1975, we're kind of forgetting it, and I wasn't any longer in college. And then the Watchtower starts this funny little policy of encouraging young witnesses to go to college for specific skills that the Watchtower could use. That's a big change from punishing witnesses from going to college and then encouraging going to college for certain reasons. And this was starting to disturb me as more and more odd things were happening, and the control started to get stronger and stronger. Then about this time, I started more research. I was still a loyal witness, and one of my favorite doctrines to research was that the topic of the Trinity. And I became quite skilled at refuting the Trinitarians as I was going knocking on doors, talking to pastors. I did a debate with a pastor or someone who's studying to get a PhD in New Testament Greek, and I did a debate. And I found out that I could handle them, and they did not seem to understand or defend their doctrine very well. I felt really good about that I could refute the Trinity with just about anybody I came across. And I started a little newsletter. And this was the big mistake that got me in trouble. Well, it worked for a bit, and then it didn't work. I started a newsletter writing up the research that I was doing, all in support of the Watchtower, God's faithful and discreet slave, and sharing it with people, and people that I didn't know. I had contact, kind of like pen pals, we'll say. And I joined a little social, we'll call it a social club, of folks that love to solve brain puzzles. I'll put it that way. And some of these folks were Jehovah's Witnesses. One of them was a Bethelite, and he wanted my little newsletter. So we'd share newsletters. I'd share my newsletters on how to refute the Trinity, amongst other things. And these newsletters somehow, some way, found its way to the headquarters at that time in Brooklyn. And they were going to the writing staff, the writing department. And I didn't know that at the time. Then later I was told that, yes, my newsletters had reached the writing department, and they were concerned that someone might be reading these things and thinking that I was going off on a tangent or trying to start my own religion or something like that. And it seems like someone had read something and got in trouble with the Watchtower, and they wondered if I was the cause of it. I was found innocent on that trial. But then I thought, this is a very controlling organization, and I'm not comfortable with this. And I was living in California at the time, and I forget the details now, but somehow I got contacted by the Watchtower through a friend, and that they were looking for persons outside of Brooklyn, outside of the headquarters, out in the field, so to speak, that could be used as researchers for the research department. There's a writing department and there's a research department. And my first assignment was to look in the local Kingdom Hall congregation's library to see if they had some really old literature there of the old Kingdom ministries, because as they explained to me, at New York Bethel, they did not have all the old literature in their library. They didn't have it. So they wanted me to seek, if I look through the congregation, Kingdom Hall Library, a local one, see if I could find old literature and send it in. So I found some old literature, and I told the elders I was following what the Watchtower Society said, and I was going to take it and send it back to Brooklyn. And the elder says, "No, you can't do that." What? Well, this is the headquarters. This is Bethel, and they want me to send this in. And they go, "Nope, can't do that." And I thought, well, I thought this organization was united, and they were all going to submit to Brooklyn. And then I realized there's not this unity. But I was there then, from then on, associated with the research part of the writing desk. And soon after that, a circuit overseer came to the congregation and knew me, or knew of me, and we became friends. And while he was serving in the area, because a circuit overseer has a circuit to go in, I met him. He met my family. I met his family. And of course, they didn't have any children, but his wife, and got to know him. And while he was serving other congregations, we would visit and talk about things. And through him, I learned so much about the inside of the organization. He explained some things and told me some secret stories. And that's what I wanted to share tonight. I haven't shared this. I don't think I've shared this with anyone much, at least certainly not on the Six Screens Network. But he was explaining that in the early 1980s, and maybe you know the history of the Watchtower in the early 1980s, was that Brooklyn Bethel had a upset. They had Ed Dunlop, who had written what was known as the Truth Book, which was the major publication, that little blue book. Let's see if I got a copy of it here. No, I don't. The Truth Book, which was, as they touted, the #1 published book, even in the Guinness Book of World Records, the most distributed book. Ed Dunlop had written that, and he was the registrar or the teacher for the Gilead School there at Bethel. And he, from reading the Bible, had concluded that the Watchtower was wrong on some of its doctrines, like the other sheep class and what that's about, where Jesus said in John 10, "I have other sheep that I must gather." And he contradicted the governing body and the current view. And this spread. Other Bethelites became convinced that the Watchtower was wrong. There is a story of how some of these Bethelites would go secretly and have their own Bible studies. Yeah, their own Bible studies. And at one of those Bible studies, one of the fellows stood up and said, he held up a Bible, and he said, "We know that this is true." And then he held up a Watchtower, and he says, "And we know this is not." And this spread to other people, one of them being a nephew of the president. President is Fred Franz, and the nephew was Ray Franz. And Ray Franz was very well important in the Watchtower because he went from being a circuit overseer, I think, to a district overseer. And then because he was invited into the writing department, and he researched this major work about that size called the Aid to Bible Understanding. And he became the editor and contributor to the Aid book. And that was pretty important. And it was a major hit. I remember being at the assembly where this was released. Oh, this was great news. We never had anything like that. An encyclopedia of all the major doctrines and Bible history and research and archaeology and all that in one volume. And he was the one responsible for it. So this got him a seat on the governing body for doing the Aid book. Well, he hung out with Ed Dunlop, had communication. I don't know all those details, but that convinced Ray that there's something fishy going on. So he was keeping notes, and he was watching what was going on, and he wrote about it in the book, Crisis of Conscience. First book like that in a long time, coming out of a writer who had been a researcher for the Watchtower, exposing the Watchtower. So he made this theological jump and break with the Watchtower. This was the early 1980s. I don't remember the exact date. And this spread, and so that and more were expelled from the Watchtower, especially the headquarters. And we heard about those things. Now, when I was meeting with my circuit overseer friend a couple years after that, he started to tell me some of the inside stuff. That after that shakeup in Brooklyn Bethel, that the governing body seriously considered and decided that they were going to ask all elders and what was known as the ministerial servants, all of them had to sign a pledge of loyalty to the governing body. And that was going to become policy, a loyalty oath. Now, as this circuit overseer was explaining to me the inner workings of the society, that you have the governing body, and they are the governing body, and they have direct representatives to the rest of the organization. Those are the circuit overseers. Elders, which are a step below, would be considered by policy to be indirect representatives of the governing body. But the direct representatives of the governing body are the circuit overseers. They can speak with authority. And when they speak, everyone else listens. So that's why the circuit overseers come out and visit. They make sure that the local congregations are all in line, doing the right thing, and they can speak as the governing body, and their decisions are pretty well final. Now, what he revealed to me, and this particular circuit overseer, I still have fond memories of him. I think he's still alive. Last I heard, as of about 4 or 5 years ago, he was at headquarters, Bethel headquarters, and he was someone high up in the leadership, not governing body, but in the running of running Bethel. And a key person, I know what his position is, and I don't want to say what. His first name, we'll just say, is Sam. But a nice guy. I liked him very much, and we had some good fellowship. And he revealed that when the society makes a decision, well, we all out in the field thought that they pray about it, and Jehovah just reveals it to the governing body, and they all agree. He says that's not how it works. So when they're trying to decide whether to make a decision like have everybody sign this loyalty oath, they were not sure what to do. So they went out and wrote a letter discreetly to all the circuit overseers. And if I remember right, he showed me the letter and read it to me, where the governing body said to the circuit overseers, what do you think of this idea of us asking everybody to sign a loyalty oath? And the word came back to Bethel from a significant number of circuit overseers. And their response to Bethel was that if they put out this loyalty oath, they will walk off the job. And he told me that with, wow, that's kind of interesting story, isn't it? You know, and that the circuit overseer body was able to overturn the governing body's decisions. If enough of the circuit overseers were back this up, because the society relies on the circuit overseers more than I understood. That I would have never known that. And there's so many things that the circuit overseers are asked to do and have the authority to do that I didn't understand. So he explained how that worked with the circuit overseers, that they get inside information. As soon as the governing body decides something, they hear about it. So the society comes up with a new view, a new thing. Well, then the circuit overseers know it, and they go out to the congregations, but they're not allowed to reveal it, because the policy is you wait until it comes out in print, and then once it's read and studied in the local congregation, which you're all supposed to read at the same time, then it becomes a policy. But the circuit overseer knows it ahead of time. So he says he had, the policy for the circuit overseer is that he goes out and they will talk and they'll teach and they'll ask questions. And if they're reading a publication that contradicts the new view, he says, we can't say anything about it. We are required to study it. They read it. And whatever person says, we have to let it go. We don't say, well, that we don't believe that anymore. They're not allowed to say that. So he revealed, and there were times that I knew where we were studying something. There was a publication back in those years that we were studying at the book study. But what we were studying at the book study at that time was being reversed at Bethel. So he said that the society worked kind of secretly through the circuit overseers. And one of them, maybe you've noticed in the years that through the years, the Watchtower will have an article on some really odd things, or things that are worse than odd. And you may wonder, how does the Watchtower know about this to write about it? So the Watchtower wanted to write an article on the badness of these adult bookstores. Call them adult bookstores, okay? And they needed some inside information. So they're not going to ask the local publishers to go visit one of those places. They're not going to ask the elders to do it either. So they asked a circuit overseer to go to one of these adult bookstores and check it out. So they would gather that information, send it back to Bethel, and it would come out in a publication. And if I remember right, this circuit overseer happens to carefully go into one of these bookstores, which has other things there too. And the fellow who cleans the floor was a witness and recognized the circuit overseer going into one of those. He says that's a embarrassing thing, and you have to explain why he was there, that it wasn't to look at the things that are in the bookstore, but to find out so the society could write it up and warn the publishers about what's going on. So he would reveal these situations and stories of how they use these circuit overseers. The circuit overseers get this information and pass it back. The circuit overseers hear issues in the local congregations, the field questions, get the good questions from the field, knocking on doors, and send it back to Bethel, and those things can end up in the magazines. There's another one that I learned from talking to another brother who was getting my little newsletter, who worked at Bethel, he said, "Did you notice that there was a Watchtower study, not a study article, but a Watchtower article, maybe it was Awake, on the sin of getting too friendly with animals, bestiality. It was in the Watchtower." He says, "Do you know where that article came from? Why is that in the Watchtower?" And the answer was, at that time, I don't know if the society still does. Do they have the Watchtower Farms? He says one of the Bethelites there at Watchtower Farm got too involved with his looking after the animals, and he was disfellowshipped. So some of these articles, you get the inside track being associated with the headquarters. You hear these things about where some of these articles come from. And it's because Bethel isn't that sterling place that we always thought it was. I thought it, well, the Holy Spirit is just floating on down the hallway or something like that. Oh, they've just got, everybody is just wonderful and perfect, and the Holy Spirit. And then you hear these stories, because you got this picture, they're the faithful and discreet slave, and they've got, God directs them and keeps them faithful and discreet. To hear these inside stories of what goes on, and then confirmed, I get it right from someone in Bethel, either from, as I said, from a circuit overseer or from someone who is currently in Bethel telling these stories. And when I was, again, this was all happened in California. A tragic story. This is when you go, wait, this shouldn't be happening. There's something wrong here. But a brother, a Jehovah's Witness, a young fellow, went to Bethel, got his eyes opened when he was there, the kind of stuff that goes on. And about the same time, we had a summer assembly, and I remember being there, sitting there, hearing the stories, where they had a drama. So this is not rumor, this is not innuendo, this is an announcement at the big summer assemblies. In fact, this was an international summer assembly. And I think this was in the late 70s, early 80s. And they had a drama. And you all know what a drama is, where they put on this skit, this play. And in there, it wasn't a biblical drama. It was a current drama of what could happen in a congregation if they're not paying attention. And in the story, this drama that was portrayed is a young man who likes other men. And at the end of the drama, they said, the things that you saw here, brothers and sisters, this happened in Jehovah's organization where they're homosexuals at Bethel. Okay, so this was announced. This is not rumors, and this was an announcement. So this kind of stuff was going on at Bethel. And I had heard it confirmed. Not, of course, it's confirmed at an assembly on the loudspeaker, then you know it's confirmed. But others had confirmed it. Yes, there was a homosexual ring. In fact, that was the announcement. There was a homosexual ring at Bethel. And you're thinking, how is this happening? This is God's organization. And they announce it, that this is going on. And it's a homosexual ring. They're amongst the Bethelites. How is it that the center of God's organization is happening like this? How could this be? Well, anyway, some young man from this congregation, this was in a San Jose congregation in California, comes back from Bethel, and he can't reconcile what he saw with his own eyes and the attitude people have toward Bethel outside in the field, of how they elevate the organization and those who went to Bethel. And I was there in the had moved into this congregation that this had just happened in, and this brother couldn't handle it, and he went up to a bridge over a lot of water and took his life. And it was just tragic. This shouldn't be happening. And so this is going on in my mind as I'm seeing this thing, hearing these things, and I'm wondering, how come others aren't upset or confused? How can you reconcile this as God's organization with this nonsense that there are folks, and suicide was a problem because, especially for those who had gone to Bethel and couldn't reconcile what they're seeing, and then they go back home and they tell their family and they're confused, and what they see in the world, the dirty things in the world, are happening at Bethel, and everything comes crashing down of what is true, what is false. They believe that the Watchtower, they believe the Bible's true, and the only true organization, the only true religion is Jehovah's Witnesses. Why do they say that? Because we all went door to door, and we're knocking on doors. Some are pioneers. I vacation pioneered for a while, putting on all these hours, and we're taking to the doors a publication that says you can recognize. How do you recognize a true religion? You can recognize because it changes lives. But wait, we're meeting these mature Jehovah's Witnesses that are doing the same things that we're seeing in the world. It's not changing lives. And the leadership, the faithful and discreet slave, isn't faithful and discreet when they teach these things that flip-flop and destroy families. The example I gave at the beginning of the show tonight about the rule of whether a couple that's where one of them's a witness, one of them's not, and they're not technically married because they live in a backwater country in Africa. No disrespect to Africa, but there's not a lot of enforced rules and laws there. And they have children together. And then the Watchtower says, you can't be living together. You have to get legally married. But what if you can't get a legal divorce? There's some countries you cannot get a legal divorce. It's not allowed. So what do they do? There are countries in the world where it's not possible to get a legal divorce, or it used to be. So what do you do? And the Watchtower's position was the witness who has just become a witness. Now, if they can't get married, they are to leave the home. And then a little over a year later, the Watchtower sends out a form that if you sign this, it's okay. And they sign the form. You sign this form and saying that you regard yourself as married, even though you're not legally married, and it's okay. You don't have to leave the home. And it destroyed families. This is not the conduct of God's chosen, faithful and discreet or wise slave that's in the leadership. And this was all going on in my head and my heart as I'm trying to figure this out. And I see others can't handle it and they commit suicide or they walk away. Well, what is truth? What is true? So nutty things, egregious things. So after I was expelled for worshiping Jesus and being and no longer feeling that the organization is really God's organization, like they said, I start seeing lies in the literature. That was disturbing. There is, I'm going to show this other book, but it's also green, so it won't show up. It's the Harp of God, the ancient, the original edition of the Harp of God, 1921. And there is a Watchtower. Well, maybe it's an awake, but they tell a story of someone who was prominent in the organization. I can't remember his name off the top of my head right now. Who was well known in the Watchtower headquarters, and he is now telling his story which would be the 1990s, telling a story back to what happened in the 1920s. So he's an elderly J-Dub, And he says that they were looking, they've been told that the end was near or the end was coming. And then in the publication come out, the harp of God, wonderful. And in there he says, oh, but he was so disappointed. It talks about the coming end, but it doesn't give an indication when. Oh no, that's false. Maybe that poor brother forgot what the harp of God says in there. He actually mentions the chapter, which that makes me suspicious. It was it chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, chapter 9, our Lord's return. He says he looked and looked and looked to see, does it say when the end is? It doesn't say. Well, yes, it does. It does talk about how close it was, and they were expecting it. 1874 was a key date here. And these dates that were so important of, we've got things in it, why our Lord's return, and the year is the 1884, 1874, whatever. And that soon the end would come, and millions now living would never die. What? Well, I got news. They did. So the Watchtower reprints this guy's story, knowing it's a lie. Again, this is not a rumor, hearsay. The Watchtower was the Awake reprints this. No hesitation. But what they print in there, claiming what the Harp of God book says, is a lie. How do you explain that? And with the intent to say, cover up their history, that they predicted the end in a generation from 1874, and it didn't happen. There's no good excuse. I also remember there was another Watchtower came out in 1990, if I remember, where they listed their qualifications that prove they're the faithful slave. And in there, they list qualifications that, if you look carefully in the literature, is false. They made a claim that they were neutral during World War I. I had an original copy in my hands, because a local J-Dub had it in his library, an original Watchtower from 1918, where they were not neutral regarding World War I. They encouraged the congregations to buy war bonds. So this 1990 Watchtower was lying about their own history, and you could show it from their own literature. This is just too much. So I needed to know those things, and that's why I'm talking about it here, the insides on the Watchtower, so that you could know some of the things that they were doing that was easily proved. Well, not totally easily. Some of these articles, it's hard to get, but they're taking them down from their website. But they are not innuendo and rumor, but really happened, that shows that why would God use an organization that needs to lie about its qualifications to be the faithful, discreet slave? That launched me out. So about this time that I'm seeing these things about the Watchtower, which would be the late 1980s, which is also the time when they were predicting that communism, the USSR would never collapse until Jesus returned. And then just about that time, the Berlin Wall fell. And so that's another false prophecy. At that time, as I mentioned, I was associated with the research department, and I got to know some others that were contributing writers to the Watchtower. I found out that there were writers who were not physically at Brooklyn Bethel, 25 Columbia Heights. They were not there. They were out in the field, and they were invited to write articles and submit them to the Watchtower. and I got to know one of them because I was an IBM. I worked for IBM, so I was an IBMer, and he also worked for IBM. I had moved to North Carolina. He was in California, and we became friends. And he was a contributing writer to the Watchtower Society. And he may have been I'm trying to remember who was the first one, but somebody told me, I think it was him. Won't say his name because his first name is so unique. I don't want to get him in any kind of trouble. But we became friends, and I thought of us as good friends. And he told me I need to call up my contact there at Bethel for the research department. They had an offer. And so I called up and they said, well, we like what you've done so far in your writings, and you write these excellent articles. We've seen them on refuting the Trinity, and you're an expert in that area. And we want you to write a series of Watchtower study articles. There's a difference between the ordinary Watchtower articles or Wake articles and the study articles. The study articles, of course, everybody reads, and you have to have questions, and you read them and you get the answer out of the paragraphs. They wanted me to write a series of Watchtower study articles refuting the Trinity. Okay, one of my favorite topics. So I wrote the first one and I sent it off. And I got a letter back thanking me, from the writing department, thanking me for the article. I had, now you think, what, can anybody do that? No, you have to be invited to write for the society. And they send you these special little address labels. Because if you just send something to the mail room there at headquarters, they will catch it, they go through it, and it's not going to make it to the writing department. But if you have a special label, which changes, I don't know how often, but they'll keep changing it so that you can't fake them out. But it bypasses the mail room and gets right to the writing department. So I even had those labels as they invited me to write a series of Watchtower articles. So I wrote one, sent it in. They liked it. They didn't use it. And somewhere in that time frame, the booklet came out, Should You Believe in the Trinity? Oh, that does show up because that's not green. And I noticed some things in there, a couple of paragraphs that sounded very, very familiar to me. I can't claim that they actually pulled things out of my newsletters and into there because they never acknowledged that. But there's some things in that Trinity booklet that sounded exactly like things I'd written in my newsletters. So this was happening about that time. But also at that time, I started looking into the topic of should Jesus be worshipped. This was about the time that I encountered a Christian standing outside of Kmart, and I'm processing, well, that had happened, actually that happened 10 years before, but I was still researching that. And then I got in touch with another writer, not at Brooklyn, but out in California. He's passed away now. We had a little meeting there, he and I and a couple other folks, one of the other writers. And when I was visiting California, we spent the night there and talked and shared stories. And this fella, he's passed away. His name is Nelson. And he had written a solid book on refuting the Trinity. So we became fast friends. And we kept in touch. And I talked to him, what do you think about worshiping Jesus? Because the Watchtower hadn't really embraced not worshiping Jesus. Back in the 1950s, they solidly worshiped Jesus. Then in 1950s, they drifted away from that. 1970s, they said you could worship Jesus in a relative sense. I got a story to tell you about that one. That was funny. Watchtower came out and said you could worship Jesus in a relative sense. That was one of the questions from readers. And they were kind of on the fence whether you could worship Jesus or not. So I thought, hey, looks like you can worship Jesus. So I talked with Nelson, and He said he knew someone in the writing department, and that even the writing department was kind of leaning toward that. But the writing department doesn't make the final decisions. The governing body and sometimes the service desk, which had the power of disfellowshipping people, make such decisions. But he thought, well, hey, go ahead. And so I wrote an article encouraging that we could worship Jesus. And I told some local Jehovah's Witnesses about that. And that was the end of my career. So submitted a couple articles and did some research and did some for the society. But once I wrote an article that you should worship Jesus, that ended it there, because the headquarters, the governing body, had moved from a position of it was okay to worship Jesus in a relative sense to no, you cannot. But they hadn't put that in print up to that point. So I had submitted an article saying that was appropriate just at the time that they had decided to go against that you can't worship Jesus. They finalized that view just about the same time. And that's when I was put on trial. And I confessed, well, there's nothing to confess. I'd written the article. I'd told other people about it, and that was the end of that. I want to back up and tell a story about the friend that I had that was a circuit overseer in California. We are out driving around telling stories, and he says, Jay, got a question for you. He says, you understand that I'm a direct representative of the governing body, and I don't remember his exact words, but he'd said that, he's, of course, a circuit overseer, so he is a direct representative. But sometimes he has questions. And he can't always just pick up the phone and call headquarters and say, what does this mean? That's not his first choice. He says, this latest Watchtower on you can worship Jesus and can you worship Jesus? He says, I read it. I don't understand it. He says, can you, you're into this. Can you explain this? And he says, you realize, who do I ask? He says, as a circuit overseer, who can I ask? I can't, if I have questions, I don't ask my wife to explain the Watchtower to me. And I certainly can't go to the elders and ask them, what does the Watchtower mean? He says, so I'm going to rely upon you. Heard a voice there. Anyway, he says, I can't, who do I ask? So he asked me to explain this Watchtower to him on whether you can worship Jesus. And that, as I said, soon after that is when I got further involved, submitting articles and invited to write an article, a series of articles refuting the Trinity. And then that's the rest of the story. I was found guilty of telling other Jehovah's Witnesses that it was okay to worship Jesus in the local congregation, and that was the end of that. And was expelled, and then you lose everything. You lose all your friends, because as a loyal witness, you're not encouraging friendship outside of the Watchtower. So all my friends were in the Watchtower, lost them all, destroyed the family, all of that. So that was my experience of involvement inside the organization. So I don't know if I'm seeing the comments here. This sounds interesting, and I have more stories I could tell, but do you have anybody want to call in and tell some story or comment on this, or something that you came across that was very egregious that the Watchtower did? They did this, or some funny stuff, nutty stuff, like saying that the fulfillment of Ezekiel is mainstream Christians naming their sports teams after animals. Oh, no. All right. Anybody want to call in before I continue with other stories?
I had a question. First of all, I'm thoroughly enjoying this. I had a question. If you might have some input on this, I'd appreciate it. You talked about getting some of the backstory for some of the updates in the society's teachings. Have you ever gotten any clarity as to why Watchtower changed their blood doctrine and included fractions?
No, I did not. Well, if you read Crisis of Conscience, Ray Franz may have some insight on that. The Watchtower governing body, they'll just come up with a policy, they'll publish it. Now, sometimes if they're smart, they'll ask the circuit overseers to see what they believe and what they feel. But they didn't have any real feedback on the blood. But then just from practice and this policy going out, then Ray Franz writing up what he knew is that people were dying of this, and they didn't have a clear biblical support for what they're saying. For example, if you research blood like I did, you find out that in the Bible, in the Old Testament, there are three different policies depending on what the blood was being used for. And the Watchtower couldn't make up, their arguments dealt with just the blood that was meant to be on the altar. And they misunderstood this, and they made it a rule, and people were dying. And what do you do? So that therefore, because of the blood fraction idea, that was possible that you could take blood fraction and it would save your life, but it's not really whole blood, that they were trying to finagle out of their lack of thorough research and study of what the Old Testament actually says about blood. They were challenged by other ex-witnesses who were prominent in their ministry, who did research it and find out that in some cases, if you accidentally got blood in your mouth, that this is not the big tragedy. Or if you ate something that had not been thoroughly bled, that it wasn't a death penalty kind of a thing. It's blood that was meant to be on the altar. Now that's a problem. You can't rob the altar of a sin offering and consume the blood. You can't do that. So they didn't complete the research, but make it a disfellowshipping thing. And then outside ex-witnesses research this and bring it forward through a conference, a convention of ex-witnesses. And then the Watchtower goes, uh-oh. Now this is only what I got from the not from headquarters, but from talking to ex-witnesses that were in that arena. That so I don't know what actually is the real backstory on that, but from the things that Ray Franz wrote in his book, that people in the field see these issues. It's not all crystal clear. People are dying, and then the governing body readdresses this, and they go, "Whoops, maybe we can find some way of shaving it and coming back into the middle ground, not all the way here, but kind of tinkering with it, adjusting it." But that's my impression about it, that they make up rules. These become life and death things that destroy families or whatever. And then, oops, we messed up. That's all I know on that one.
Right.
Hello,
Okay.
Jay.
Thank you very much.
Hey, thank
Hello,
you.
Jay.
Yes.
This is Kurt. How are you doing?
Best I can for an old guy. How about you?
Pretty good. Pretty good. I haven't talked to you in a long time. You were talking about the theme, I guess, some of the nutty things from the Watchtower. And the first thing you brought up was their interpretation of Ezekiel's prophecy. And the nation shall know that I am Jehovah. I guess most of the audience remembers that, the older people.
Maybe
I
so.
know I remember it. Yeah, and that and the 3 Revelation books, very unusual. They're almost could be compared to the 7th volume.
Yes.
That Russell didn't write, but the
Right.
Watchtower, a couple Watchtower writers wrote the 7th volume.
Right.
I remember you said something about their application to the worshiping of animals and stuff that was taking place in the Jerusalem's temple. And I remember being at the book study, distinctly remember that, years and years ago, and where they applied that to NFL teams in particular. Pretty nutty. But just for the record on this Ezekiel book, the nation shall know that I am Jehovah, while the audience, because you didn't have time to get into it, we don't have to spend much time on it, but the chapter 1, where Ezekiel has the vision of the heavenly chariot, and they made an application of that to Jehovah's universal organization, and of course they had the earthly part of the organization, so they made an application. There in Ezekiel 9, the writer's inkhorn, they had the writer's inkhorn, and they were a watchman to Christendom, if you remember.
Yep.
And that's how you remember that they had to use the writer's inkhorn. There's one last thing I wanted to mention. I could talk about it quite a bit more, but other people got to talk. There, Ezekiel 38 and 39, you might have realized this years ago. I remember, I don't know, decades and decades ago, there in Ezekiel 38, they applied that to themselves being attacked, the Watchtower being attacked by the nations.
Yes.
At Armageddon.
Yep.
And one last thing, the account, the prophecy in 38 and 39, they are being attacked by the nations because Jehovah allows it, because they have been unfaithful to the covenant. So I, of course, apply this to physical Israel. We won't get into all that, but I wonder what the Watchtower would say about the fact that Jehovah allows this attack because they've been unfaithful to the covenant. So anyway, thank you for your time. I just wanted to speak to you. I haven't talked to you in a long time. And I'll go back to mute, and thank you, okay? Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. That reminds me, there is, along the lines of where there's an implication of their unfaithfulness, there is a study Watchtower, and I can't remember the year. I'm thinking it was early 80s. Yeah, I think early 80s, to guess, where they did a study of, I think it's Jeremiah chapter 25, about the story of the Recabites. And in the Bible, in Jeremiah, it has the story of the Recabites who were faithful to their covenant, their historic covenant, and God was having the Recabites, or use the Recabites, to teach the Jews in Jerusalem how important it is to stay faithful. And the Recabites, and God used the prophet Jeremiah to go to the Recabites and say, go do this thing, which would violate their covenant. But they go, no, we're not going to violate the covenant. We're going to stay true. And the study article said that this was a prophetic of Jehovah's organization in the last days. And then the question presents yourself, okay, if this is a prophecy, then that would mean then at some point somebody is going to come to the Watchtower and tempt them to sin. And some kind of a nutty conclusion that if you followed the logic of the organization, the logic that the organization fulfills this prophecy or statement in Jeremiah. They always thought they were fulfilling it. That you get some really nutty conclusions that the Watchtower is not as good as they claim, that they're going to have some major failings. I have a funny story to tell. Kurt, you mentioned the Revelation book. I remember going through the first edition, and this is nutty. And I just said, I can't stomach this. And in there is, if I remember right, is the third trumpet. And of course, as you remember, all the trumpets in Revelation are fulfilled in all the assemblies in Cedar Point, Ohio in the 1920s. Oh, dear. That was the fulfillment of the announcements to the world of these trumpets that these angels would trumpet were all fulfilled by these 1920 assemblies. And in there, one of the declarations was that I actually had a copy, an actual physical copy of the declaration that was handed out. I got this from a local friend who had one of the largest collections of Watchtower literature I'd ever seen. And in there, he had this declaration. And in it, the last point was that the end would come and the Jews would be welcomed. They were God's people, and the ancient worthies, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, would be resurrected. And then the Watchtower later on took this to mean that they'll be resurrected and live at Beth Sarim in San Diego County, California. Anyway, it was a false prophecy. So I've asked witnesses since then. I said, what do you think about this? This is a false prophecy. Right here in the Revelation, its Grand Climax book, speaking of the third declaration, because in the Revelation book, Grand Climax, it says that no doubt this declaration was made at the direction of an angel. No doubt, it says. All right, no doubt. Which makes you think, why do they say that, no doubt, unless there is a doubt? But anyway, they said no doubt. If it's true that it was made at the declaration of an angel, how come it's a false prophecy that the last point in the declaration has been rejected by the Watchtower eventually as being false? And the witness looking at that couldn't answer it except to say that, well, Jehovah works that way sometimes. He'll mislead his people through the angels. What? And I told the fellow, I said, sir, if you believe that that's the way God works, that he will sometimes mislead his channel and do that working through angels, sir, I think you need to stay just where you are. You really fit well within your organization because that's the kind of thinking that people outside of the Watchtower, we consider that to be nutty. So that's another one of the nutty things, since Kurt mentioned the Red Climax.
Yeah, just one more comment. That was very good, Jay. Just real briefly, on the Ezekiel book, it came to me a minute ago that, of course, this book is about Christendom. And the Watchtower being the watchman, that's the foundation of the book. But in that book, unfaithful Jerusalem, when they were unfaithful, pictures Christendom,
right?
And Edom and Babylon. So you have three actually entities, or so to speak, that would picture Babylon or Christendom. And I thought that was a little far-fetched too. Thank you, Jay. I'm going back to mute. Thank you.
Yes. Wow, there's so many contradictions. Another one from the Revelation book. The woman riding the red beast, the woman riding, which would be the UN. The UN destroys the riding lady, which would be Christendom. So wait a minute, you follow that. How is it that the UN and then the UN gets destroyed or the beast gets destroyed. If you follow that logic, it's very hard to put that together, that Jerusalem or Christendom is destroyed in 1919, but wait, because that's when they say Babylon fell in 1919. But wait a minute, the Babylon, which is Christendom, doesn't start to ride the UN until the UN comes into existence. How does Babylon fall before it can get on that horse? So it's if you follow the logic of their thinking in that red book, it doesn't follow sequence. They have contradictions, and apparently someone wrote that down and didn't say, "Hey, wait a minute, we ought to write out a timeline here." Well, that doesn't work. So yeah, nutty stuff, and that's of course.
There's been pictures of that Scarlet Harlot since the Middle Ages, though.
Is that right?
Yeah, there's, you know how they did those little cartoons in the margins of Bibles.
Oh, uh-huh.
There's a real cute one, and it's got this little Scarlet Harlot, and she's on the beast, and it's red and gold, and it's in that medieval style. So the art department wasn't the first one to do that.
Yeah, and I that one I'd heard that, not that particular one, but I'd heard that I think that was in Ray Franz's books about when and this happened to me, so I can verify it's true. The writing department would get the assignment to write something, and they would go out and research it in Christendom's seminary libraries. And
of course, Metropolitan Museum of Art's right there, dear.
Yes. And when I was given the assignment, by the way, to do my first article on refuting the Trinity, the fella who was the head of the research department who was giving me my assignment, he told me specifically, he says, you're going to need to find a local seminary, go out to their seminary, to their library, and research this in their library. He says, but don't tell anybody, because we can't have it known that you are researching your materials for the Watchtower study article and doing your research at a seminary. You can't do that. And he said another thing.
You know, a library is a library, right?
Right. And then he wanted, my first assignment was the intent was to refute a book that had come out of mainstream Christianity, Robert Bowman's book on why you should believe the Trinity. Wanted me to read it and then refute it in my articles. So he said, but you can't tell anybody that you're going and reading Christendom's literature. And I said, okay, I won't tell anybody. Well, no witnesses, not back then. I didn't. But yes, they do ask the writers to go read Christendom's stuff in order to reply to it. And the fellow at Bethel said the reason that they wanted this done is because this material coming out of mainstream evangelicals was having an effect on witnesses who were getting this information from people at the door. They go door to door, they talk to the householder who would tell them or come up with these arguments that they got from these books, and it was affecting witnesses because they were not equipped to answer the objections, and the writers at Bethel weren't up to the task. So that was an interesting inside point that I didn't realize that, I thought they walked on water or something like that.
How about that? Well, Robert Thurman, that's Uma Thurman's dad.
I said Robert Bowman. Yeah.
Berman, okay. Robert Thurman's cool too.
Yeah.
I was glad that Kurt's still living. I called to tell you about the Diana Wilson book. She has written a book about the blood issue and how these Rh factor infants die, and she's got statistics in there. I gave the book to someone else, so I can't quote the statistics to you today. But it's a heart-wrenching book, but it's important that people have a meeting with their doctor or anesthesiologist and don't let these so-called elders that didn't go to high school biology in their lives. That's
Right.
all I can say about that. Oh, and the Africa
hello,
story
Pete.
the Africa story that you mentioned, that rings a bell with me. And the CO came to my dad's to talk to my dad because they were best friends forever, and he moved up to be a circuit overseer. So he came to our house, and he was talking to my dad about it. This was, 1,000 years ago now.
Yeah.
What had happened in addition was some of these men who had converted in Africa to being witnesses had previously been tribal animists, and they had second wives.
Right.
And they were throwing the second wife or the original older first wife into the street, sometimes with the children, and not paying support for both women. So no matter what they did in their bedroom, they were throwing out one of the wives.
Right. Thank you for that. Yes, that's the kind of nonsense that, right, that they overstep. They read scripture, but they overstep the meaning of it, and they pull stuff out of it that isn't quite there and make rules that affect, and they don't think it through. And of course, they're not paying attention to scripture. I claim that they've got the scripture wrong, as well as their oppressive strong-arming of people, that this is all very bad.
Yeah, they choke on the gnat and swallow the camel.
Yes.
It's not funny when people die, and it's not funny when people are thrown into the street. And a lot of times it's the women that suffer.
Yes. Yes, this is
great talking to you. I'll talk to you on a Sunday sometime again.
All right. Yeah. And yes, everybody, as Rick said at the beginning, I have a show on Sunday afternoon, but that's religious. That's gets into the Bible and all that kind of thing. That's at 4 p.m. Well, 4 p.m. is the court, Christian court, but at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard is my show on answering Bible questions. Any Bible question that you've got, any Bible question at all, is fair game. All right, that's my brief little blurb. Thank you.
Well, tell us another story.
All right. One that I find egregious, and this is more of a common story, is that you have elders who they're on these judicial committees, and they're disfellowshipping people and counseling them, and oh this and oh that, and yet they themselves are doing the same thing. This gets me on the verge of, I'm not an angry person, but this is so disgusting. There is a story of an elder. I was in the same congregation for a time with him. I moved out, but then I keep up and I hear these stories. This elder who disfellowshipped my mother for smoking, because for a while it was okay to smoke, and then overnight the new rules, and then you if you smoke, you're out. And I knew that smoking was harming my mother. I grant that, but was it really a disfellowshipping offense? So I didn't like that, and I spoke with the elder that had disfellowshipped her. I mean, he's one of three, of course. And I said, my mother is going to apply for reinstatement, and please. She has suffered. She's actually dying from smoking, and can you reinstate her? I found out later that this same elder, who I had been with years, I kind of grew up in that congregation. He got his hand caught in the cookie jar. He, as you know, elders will be asked to go to other congregations to give a public talk. So he went to this other congregation. As I wasn't there, but I got it from a person who got the whole story, a good friend of mine too, that this elder is at this congregation, and I believe at this congregation he hadn't brought his wife, and I believe he had 2 daughters, didn't bring them along, but he's giving a public talk, and in the audience there's congregation members, of course, Jehovah's Witnesses, and in that audience was this couple, or somebody had going door to door. They contacted someone in the territory that was kind of interested in Jehovah's Witnesses. They got interested, and they invited this young lady to come to the public talk. And she's sitting there. The guy gives up, this elder that I know personally, that disfellowshipped my mother. He gets up on the platform and he's giving a public talk. And this girl that's never been to the Kingdom Hall before, turns to the people that contacted her in the territory. She says, "Oh, I know that guy. That's my boyfriend that's giving the talk." So, like I said, he's married and got two daughters, and so he's been sleeping with this gal that he met. I don't know how he met her, but she was in another territory, another congregation. So on the side, he is cheating on his wife and kids, claiming to be an elder. Well, he was an appointed elder, and disfellowshipping people. This is hypocrisy. They're just so good and so wonderful, and yet he goes out, and I don't know what he's thinking in his head, but he told that story firsthand to my personal friend, who said, "Can you believe it? Old so and so, I won't say his name." Of course, he was disfellowshipped, lost his family. This is not funny, but he destroyed a family, destroyed lives, and destroyed other people's lives because he was an elder and he could disfellowship, and he would judge who is guilty. What is happening in this guy's head? What is happening in his heart as he is condemning people and disfellowshipping them, and he is doing worse? There's a story. Another story. This one, I was not there, so I'm getting it. This one is a secondhand, but was known. This is, what I remember is that as the time I was a ministerial servant, and we got this letter from Bethel headquarters that all elders and ministerial servants have to be extra careful of not being alone with the sisters. You cannot be alone or counsel them or any kind of thing or be with them. You cannot do this. No. You cannot be alone with them. And at this time, a couple stories came out. One of these stories was that a circuit overseer, as he's handling the circuit assembly, there was a young fella. His mother was a single parent, and it wasn't quite neatly known who the father was, but it came out that the father was the circuit overseer who had met this sister at times when she was alone. So there's a scandal. Now, this other scandal I know because of it made the newspaper in my where I lived in San Jose. It made the newspaper. There was I don't remember if this guy was an elder or what his position was, but according to the San Jose Mercury News, this fellow was and he should not have been alone with a lady in the congregation, but he this lady says that this J-Dub elder, I guess he was an elder, had raped her. And in the newspaper, it came out at his trial, because he was arrested for rape. At his trial, he claims that he has this neurological disorder that he walks in his sleep, apparently also drives in his sleep, and he does things that he's not responsible for because he does it entirely in his sleep. Now, I'm not an expert in this area, so I suppose it's possible, but he would visit this lady in the middle of the night that she knew and recognized him because she knew him during the daytime, and he shows up at nighttime and comes into the home, and she has him arrested. And in the newspaper it says that this fellow that did this act, an elder, and his wife came to his defense and said, well, this could be, this could be. Okay, we have such strange stories, and we didn't hear about it as staff at the congregation. We just heard, don't you dare ever be alone with a lady, because this could happen. And I agree that religious leaders should not be alone with someone of the opposite sex. That's a very dangerous thing, generally speaking. I'm not going to make any rules here, but generally that's a very risky thing. But what is going on with these witnesses that they have to make these announcements, and this stuff ends up in the newspaper? And I remember this because the headlines, the article on the front page came out the opening day of our summer assembly. As we're going off in the car to go to our summer assembly, you open up the newspaper, and there is this crazy story of an elder. What is going on that God's organization has this nonsense going in it? Why are they not a clean organization? Why does this egregious stuff happen? Crazy stories going on. So another crazy story. We have a few minutes left. I'm just going to pause here to see if anybody's got any questions or comments, nutty stuff or egregious stuff that the Watchtower has done, the things that you saw, terrible things. If not,
go ahead. We got 717. Go ahead, 717. You're on with us. Say hello to Jay.
I'd like to, hi, Jay.
hey,
About the gender, it's as if the genders are required to be separate at all times, pretty much. Isn't that what it's like? It's what I had a question out of curiosity with.
I'm not sure I caught your question, that they ask the elders, the ministerial servants, to not meet with the ladies privately, even if they're giving counsel.
Sometimes I think this rule is reminding me of Sharia law or something like that.
Yeah, they don't separate in the Kingdom Hall, but in smaller groups, yeah, they were very cautious about that. It's sad that is all too often a problem, especially if this is Jehovah's organization. This is really sad. Yep. All right, thank you. I have another funny story.
Share a little something. If there's anybody else, give them a chance too.
Yeah. I have another funny story. We had the circuit overseer come visit our congregation. This was in California again. And if you're a witness or ex-witness, you know that, it's so exciting when the circuit overseer comes. And the circuit overseer, he can go with the sisters door to door. Of course, it's usually a public situation, or they might go into a home. They got to be careful about that, I suppose. But the circuit overseer, he was an elderly gentleman, and I remember at the meeting for field service, the ladies were saying, we ahead of time, they got an assignment. They get to work with the circuit overseer that particular Saturday morning. So that was all the plan. So I remember hearing the ladies say, I have an appointment. I made an appointment ahead of time that she could get to work with him on a couple doors, going door to door. And it was just so exciting because you get to work with the circuit overseer. So I was the only other male in the group, and I would get so I was first paired up with him. So there's a couple car groups, if you know what car groups are. So I'm in the car with him, and he's I was driving, and he was there in another car group with the ladies. And so we go out in the territory, and I remember it was winter, even though it's California, it was getting really cold that particular Saturday morning, and we're all bundled up. And he says, all right, we'll get out. And we look to him to assign who works with who and who works where. And he's got the territory card. We had territory cards, and you say, go down this street and do this, and house over house or whatever. And it's out of you two go house over house. So you'll go knocking on the doors, and you take this house, and then you take that house, and you work over house, and we'll meet back together. I'll get in touch with you. And so they looked at each other. And, oh, okay. So they go out, and so there's a total of 4 sisters, two pairs, and they're working. And I know that they're looking forward to working with him in the field service. So he and I are standing there, and he watches them, and I'm going, okay, so what are we going to do? Are we going to go over here and we're going to work these doors, or what are we going to do? And he's not talking. He's not saying anything. He's just standing there next to the car, leaning on the car, just, okay. And he waits until they're at the door. And he says, turns to me, he says, Brother Hess, my doctor says I need to be real careful about the weather. Could we get in the car and, move around the corner or whatever? So let the ladies work on it. He says, I want to stay warm in the car. So we sat there talking for an hour and a half, just telling stories while the ladies are going house over house in the cold, getting all it worked up. Oh, we're going to get to work with the circuit overseer, and they're not. It ain't going to happen. And because he's not going out in this cold. So he gets in, and I get it. He's elderly, and he's got to put up the appearance. And he does this every weekend, 52 weeks a year. And he didn't want to do this. So I kind of fell for him, but it was just so funny, though. We're sitting there, he and I, telling stories for, I don't know, hour and a half to 2 hours while the ladies are going house to house, putting all their hopes in this appointment where they made a specific appointment to work with the circuit overseer, and it ain't happening. So another funny story of what happens when you've got to keep up appearances, and you got to do the right thing, the Watchtower thing, when we're humans. Don't make such a big deal. So that was another one of the funny stories. See if anybody else has give a break here. See if anybody else wants to ask a question. I don't see any in the text here, and then or if someone wants to call in a question, that'd be fine.
Well,
Comments?
I'll pop in here, Jay. This is Rick. Does someone else have a comment first? I got a few people calling in here. But anyways, Jay, I had a question concerning the writing department. And, when I first met you, that was very meaningful. One time the writing department, I thought even when I was first starting to leave the witnesses that was the controlling center right there. That people in the writing department, they had to really stop and think of everything before they would publish it. They had to hit the nail right on the head, so to speak. So, it was very particular, very meticulous back then. I know you're out of the witnesses now, but do you think the same protocol or the same way of doing business in the writing department is the same today as it was, say, when you were in there?
My guess is that they've improved on things, because they were still messing up back then, where they would go to print, they would print something, and then something would happen, and then a month or so after the magazine come out, we've changed their view. They have to reprint it. It would change when the bound volume came out. There would be the article would say something different. They probably figured that out. I'm guessing just much more careful when they print stuff, because they don't want to have to retract it a few months later. that would be my guess, but I honestly don't know. I had not heard, but they're human. See, that's the thing. You know what percentage of them are human? 100%. And they make mistakes, and they are wrestling with all these changes and what life is like and what the world is like. And now they're fighting the internet, and there's people doing research against the Watchtower. They are losing. I suspect that they've had to change their approach, what they write about. There was a time when they would just go back and rehash an article that was 15 years old and reprint. Those days have completely changed. And as you know, they're not printing as many articles. When I was in it, the writing department was losing their power. Yes, they seemed to have a lot of influence, but I found out the hard way that the real power was in the service desk. There was a particular fellow on the service desk that was, I heard, out to get me, because they are the ones with the power. They decide the policies and who gets disfellowshipped and whatever. That there has been a power shift. When I was in, there was an indication of the power shifting from the writing department, and where Fred Franz had his influence, and it was being shifted to, as I heard, to the service desk. So that'd be my guess.
Well, we're good. Thank you, Jay. Now, look, Jay's on for a couple more minutes. If anyone has a question for Jay Hess, well, come on right now. Hit *6. I got a number of people listening in on the telephone line. Why don't you speak up? Say hello. Say hello to Jay. Let him know what you think of his position that he had in the Watchtower and how he kind of wiggled his way loose in some of these crazy stories. And we all have crazy stories, right? I mean, every one of us listening to this program tonight can say, wow, I like what Jay says, a lot of nutty organization. And it is a nutty organization. There's no doubt about it. Well, Jay, it's amazing to me. It's really, really amazing to me that the ex-witness community is growing big time. More and more people are leaving the Watchtower than ever before, Jay. You know, in fact, you realize at this point there's so many people, that millions that really don't believe the Watchtower, but they go because they have fear of being shunned. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, but if they get rid of the shunning policy, that will have a big effect. People say, why do I need to stay? And they'll exit. But as long as there's some kind of downside to being expelled, where they're going to shut you off, they weaponize relationships. But the more they push that, the harder it is to get people come in, and the uglier their reputation. So yeah, they're dying, and you're right. They're done. They're sticking a fork. And yep.
We got one more caller coming in from Delaware. Go ahead, Delaware.
Hi, Rick. Hi, Jay. Darren. I just wanted to say real quick that I was kind of taken aback when I first saw the thumbnail on the video when I clicked on it, and the title said Barbara Anderson, but I'm seeing Jay Hess in the thumbnail, and I'm like, hold on a second, I have to look out my window and look at my watch and make sure that I'm at the right day and time. But I just wanted to say I really appreciated you coming on here and covering for Barbara Anderson and bringing your unique perspective to Saturday night, because me personally, since I've followed Six Screens most recently, I hadn't really seen this side of you that much. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
your stories are great. I mean, you have a nice delivery. You kind of remind me of James Penn, to be honest, because I can just sit and listen to you.
Yeah, I met Penton. Yeah, that goes back some years. But yeah, you're all invited. Not tomorrow, but the following Sunday afternoon at 5 p.m. Eastern time. I do between an hour and 2 hours answering any Bible question that you've got, especially if it's related to the Watchtower questions. But anything to do with Scripture, Bible, or whatever, I love to do it.
Well, Jay, that's amazing. I mean, you've been with us now for 6 years. I mean, really appreciate it. And we have 14 programs that are here on the Six Screens. And they're all unique programs, and everyone has their own little individual flavor. But I have to say that as of in the last couple of months, I'm going to go with that, I have been getting a lot of emails about you and how people really enjoy coming in on Sundays and getting their questions answered. And I know everybody listening here tonight, we don't get into the scriptures too deep on a Saturday night. But, I always think when people, it was a religious organization. So from time to time, there's got to be some things. I know Kurt came in tonight and he mentioned some things from the book, the Watchtower book on Ezekiel. And of course, the Watchtower, they think that everything in the Bible is written about them. That they have this, they think they have a patent on Jehovah. They think they own the name, So anyways, it's really neat to see you, like Aaron just said, in a different platform here, a different venue, and we got to know you a little more than on a Sunday. You are the Bible scholar, so to speak, on Sunday for us, and you do a great job. But you were just a regular guy tonight talking about the Watchtower, and it really made a difference. And I know it's going to get a lot of people to come into your Sunday program. So what's your last words, Jay?
Thank you very much for having me, and glad to fill in for Barbara. And another, of course, she was their writer at Bethel, insider with all that important information that she was exposed to. So glad to step in when she's not feeling well, and hope she gets better. And maybe some of you will want to join us in a couple of Sundays, not tomorrow, but the next week. And keep remember the last Jay to please turn out the light. And if you can, and you meet a witness, ask them some of these questions, or tell them that you heard stories or whatever, and say, are you happy as one of Jehovah's Witnesses? Do you really believe that this is the truth? Because if it's the truth, I want it, but I've heard such terrible things. Would you be willing to sit down and answer some questions? I don't know, just something like that. I feel so sorry for him. So I'm glad. I want to thank you, Rick. I've known you for all these years, and I'm so glad for what you're doing. And I just hope that, I'm going to see you in August.
Yeah, in fact, Jay, almost on a daily basis here, I'm sending tickets off for the convention. So we're up to just about 300 people right now. And it's really remarkable. We got people coming in from the United Kingdom, from Australia, New Zealand, Germany, pretty much from all over the world. And I didn't think it was going to gain this type of traction. People are saying they're coming. Maybe they won't all show up. But I'll tell you what, if we do get the 300 plus, I'm expecting 500. If we get to 5, yeah, I'm expecting that, and I think we can probably come pretty close to it, because that's about all we can really fit into the arena. Even that's going to be a little tight. So, we're working hard to put this all together, and you're going to be giving a talk to yourself, and we're going to go over what you're going to be talking about. We're not going to make it too theological, but I was thinking along the lines of, the false prophecies in the Watchtower. We're not going to get too religious, in fact, during that conference, but we're going to talk about, your talk will be about false prophecies and how they never nailed it properly. Right. I always say they fell out of a spiritual tree and hit every branch on the way down. They really never nailed it. So we're looking forward to it. Yes.
Right. So is the conference right there at the hotel, or it's nearby, or what?
No, it's right here at the hotel. It's a beautiful hotel. It really is. And, for people, I've been across the bottom, you see, earlier, we had the scrolling across the bottom. If you go to 6screensofthewatchtower.com and hit the trending now, it'll give you all the information about the hotel. It'll give you information about where you can eat in that area. There's a lot of restaurants nearby, and we'll talk a little more about that on JW World News. So it's going to be a good time, and it's going to really be a very enlightening and encouraging event, Jay. So we're looking forward to meeting you. We've got some, Fritz Springmeyer. He's coming here in person. We got an and an AI, artificial intelligence professor from the University of Kentucky. She's a
Whoa.
former Jehovah's Witness, and she's going to talk about how the Watchtower is using AI now in their writings. We have an elder that's coming to give a talk on how his son committed suicide when he was in the Watchtower. So we got some really extreme stories too. So if anyone out there is listening and can make it, go to that Six Screens website, get the information, and we'll talk a little more about it on JW World News. But thank you, Jay. Thank you for coming in tonight and filling in for Barbara. And she'll be back with us in 2 weeks. And, I'll tell you what, Barbara, she wants to put her footprints right here on the Six Screens Telenetwork. She has so much to tell us, but she says, Rick, I could never do it. She's getting older. She could never do it. So she says, I want to do it audio. I want to be able to tell the people. So she's been giving us some exclusive information the last couple of times she was on. When she was working there at the world headquarters, there was letters coming into the organization that, had to be answered, more than likely by the service department. And some of the letters that she was reading, no one ever heard of this stuff before. People calling in with mental disorders, people calling in and asking questions about everything you could possibly think of. And some of this stuff was unbelievable. I mean, she had us on the edge of our seat. So she's coming back in 2 weeks with more of these stories, friends. So she'll be back. And she said that she misses you all and she should be okay in a couple of weeks. Thank you, Jay, for coming on.
All right. Catch you then.
All right. We'll see you next week. Yes, that'd be Jay on the Sunday program. All right. So let's just take a look here. We do have a special program coming up for those still listening in. We have a lot still listening in. We have a special program with Jimmy Bell. He'll be coming on about 9:30 tonight. And he's got a lot to talk about, this spotlight letter that he's sending off. He wants us all to write a letter to President Trump and let President Trump know about the Watchtower. So he's going to talk about that tonight. He has his own program coming on tonight around 9:30. Well, we're going to end this program here. I want to thank everyone for coming in and being with us here on this program. We now go to JW World News, so please stay with us. I know you'll find the news very fascinating too. Thank you very much. So we're going to end this here.